our pleasure, or my pleasure, on behalf of the Go Down Arts Center, to welcome everybody to this session, which is the 12th edition of our Urban Dialogue series. So a bit of background about the Go Down. The Go Down is a multidisciplinary arts and culture institution, and it has been operational for the past 20 years. This is actually our 20th year. We are celebrating 20 years this year. And we have primarily been based in the industrial area of Nairobi, out there near South B. I know most of you have been to that place. But just before COVID, in August of 2019, we moved out of that space and came here to Kilimani, to our temporary office, because we had plans to start the redevelopment of our property into a much bigger space with more facilities for arts and also for community. Now, we all know what happened in 2020. COVID came, and as a result, we had to postpone our plans for redevelopment. However, towards the end of last year, 2022, we did start demolitions and excavations of that site. So with the hope that by this time next year, we can start planning on how we are moving back to our home. We don't consider Kilimani our home. We consider our home in Industrial Area South B. Nevertheless, we are very happy with this part of town over the past 3 or so years that we've been. So our Urban Dialogue series was born here in Kilimani. This is our 12th edition. We've used this dialogue series to talk about how arts and culture intersects with urban issues. And as a result of that, we've had a very diverse program. And this year, I think this is our 6th edition. And we are very proud to collaborate on this 6th edition with let me see if I can say it right, the African Center for Migration and Society, out of the University of Witwatersrand, which is based in Johannesburg. And I think that's as much as I know. I will now invite our collaborator in chief, Ms. Karina Kanbi, to come and describe why they sought out the Go Down and why they wanted to come and collaborate with the Go Down, and to describe the project that we're here to discuss. Thank you very much, Karina. Karibu sana.
Is this mic working? Yeah, perfect. So hi, everybody. My name is Karina Kambi. I'm usually based in Accra, Ghana. So this is my second day in Nairobi. I am here on behalf of the African Center for Migration and Society, which focuses mainly on migration, mobility, and societal issues in African cities around. So I'm based in Accra. I'm doing my doctoral study with the ACMS, and it's also part of a Mellon Foundation funded project. So I'm here today to open the open call. It officially opens on the 1st of December, but we're doing an information dissemination workshop across the cities. It will happen in 3 cities, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Accra, to give people a bit of a head start, and because it's a short call, so that they can get together proposals to hopefully apply. It will be from the 1st of December to the 22nd of December. So I'll start by, I'm going to be working. We sought out the Go Down Center because they're so heavily embedded both within the creative industries here, but also within urban research. And that nexus often doesn't happen, but it's an important one. And I'll speak to it within the presentation just as soon as we begin. It's an informal session, so I'll start by summarizing some of the data and the perspective of the department, and then I will go through some of the details of the call and how to apply, and then I will be joined by Mary and Peterson to discuss how you articulate migration and mobility data into artistic projects, and a bit about what's been going on within Nairobi. So it's called, for now, the Atlas of Uncertainty, Journeys Transforming African Cityscapes. And essentially, the whole project is around the notion of an atlas, something that's not static, something that's fluid, something that can be exchanged and is ever moving. Slide. So if we start by looking at cities, but also about demographics around the world, this is from 1990. As you can see, the global south is holding the majority of young people, and India and China are dominating. That picture will look very, very different by 2050, where it's predicted that 30% of young people will be from the continent. And it's predicted within that they'll be predominantly residing within African cities. Go to the next slide. So this was from the New York Times from October. So they predict that 35% of young people by 2050 will be from the continent. And Howard French, which is on one of the next slides, the next one again, sorry, talked about the megalopolis and how from Abidjan to Lagos, by the end of the century, you'll have 40%, or on the continent, you'll have 40% of the whole population. So African cities are important, and it's important that we take note. And often we discuss demographics and migration and generally African society amongst policy circles. But it's also important that we discuss them within the creative industries as they drive often innovation within cities. To the next one. And this year's been a big year for African cities and the arts. Leslie Loco opened up the year in April with the Venice Biennale, which was called Laboratories of the Future, which looked to celebrate innovation within African cities, pulling on African creatives and also the diaspora. And then very recently we had the Sharjah Architecture Triennial, which was by Tosin Oshinowo, and she talks about the beauty of impermanence and the architecture of adaptability, the idea that resilience and innovation and reuse is part of our society and should be celebrated. And the route towards development in cities looks very different on the continent than it does elsewhere, but we shouldn't see it in any different way. It's almost like, how do we find the new tools to explore our new paths? All right, this is a slow transition. Very slow. So as I mentioned, we're working across cities, and within cities, we're working in what we classify as gateway communities. So that's communities of high mobility, migration, and that are very transient, that are often seen as stepping stones to other places. They often have high international and domestic migration. This is an example of Deep Sloot extension, and if we keep sort of pressing, it was a planned government area in 2000. And if we keep kind of pressing through, we will see it gradually, although maybe not, changes over time. And it's largely a bottom-up urbanization within that space. And it's kind of understanding how cities grow across the continent. We've done a number of surveys throughout the city. In Nairobi, we did 519 respondents who got back from the survey. We also did a series of interviews, and also we're in the process of going into doing focus group discussions. And the general themes that we've pulled out of that research is that these spaces are informal, they're unsettled, they're multi-local, and they're polychronic. What I mean by multi-local is, for example, if I'm in Rungai, I might be living there. I might have lived there for 5 years, but I may not identify with being from there. I'm from there, I'm potentially from somewhere else. My mother and father may be from 2 separate places, and I may not intend to stay there. So I live in many different worlds by being like physically in one. Polychronic is this idea that time has a different understanding and meaning and the way it relates with culture. So it's also that these spaces are disruptive and they change a lot, and that is, people are used to that. There's a culture of conviviality within these spaces. It may not be that you're best friends with your neighbor, but you get on well enough. And so through the process of the last 3 years, we've kind of been looking at asking people questions like, where do you feel like you belong? Where is your imagined future? what does governance look like in your local environment, to try and pick out some of the questions that don't get answered, to make sure that cities and these spaces are being defined by the people that live within them. Sorry, this needs to be sped up on my side. So this was the data that came from the Nairobi surveys of 2021. And it was that 31.8% of those 519 respondents that came back to us were foreign, but the majority was a domestic audience, which actually differs quite substantially to Johannesburg and to Accra. So it's interesting reading. And then Columbia University have helped us make some really quite fun maps, which is what you see here. So these are the three cities that I mentioned, Accra, Nairobi, and Johannesburg. The lines are where people have originated from. So as you see in Johannesburg, they've come from across the continent, but also beyond. In Nairobi, also very similar, but in Accra, it's quite localized. It's neighboring countries, perhaps due to their migration policy within ECOWAS. And this is location of origin. So in Kenya, you'll see the majority of people were domestic migrants from within Kenya that now live in these neighborhoods within Nairobi or surrounding countries. In Johannesburg, it's a real mixed picture. In Accra, it's mainly Nigeria, Togo, Benin, and Ivory Coast. All of these data maps will be available in what I'll call a data dump that will be presented when the open call is opened on the 1st of December. And now this is quite a fun map. It's locations of origin. So each of the households that they interviewed signifies a circle. And within each of the circles, it's where people within those households have come from. So for example, if we look at Johannesburg in the top, they're very, very small. So I apologize, you might not be able to see them. There's 5 people that have come from Ivory Coast within that one household. So what Columbia were trying to get us to do is think about data differently. How can we interact with data? How can we excite people when we present information? And this was the start of that. And this is what we will also provide for you to use. We looked at remittances because often it can help us map out home countries and belonging. You often send money back to families and to home. It's a very similar picture to where people are from. And this was household geographies, again, quite similar. We'll go on to the next one, which is aspired futures, which is quite interesting. So envisioned futures. So we asked people, where would you like to go today, tomorrow, in 5 to 10 years? The most recent discussion group that we held in Nairobi was interesting because the majority of participants wanted to go to Canada. That is a changing picture. But when we did the survey in 2021, as you can see, majority of people, despite what the media might like to tell you, wanted to stay within their regions. So in surrounding countries, there is a bit of a glut around the UK and in Northern Europe, and obviously there is some representation within the Americas as well. And this was connecting. So when I said people have multi-local identities, this was, you know, you may live somewhere, you may want to live somewhere else, you may send money to different spaces, and these lines signify that. So there's a series of lines for every single person asked. And those lines look very different depending on where you are and who you are, and also your age group. So that brings us to the open call. So the idea, what you have seen is different representations of textual data. The idea of the open call is to invite artists to interpret this data and create something new. It's to rewrite stories through your own eyes, but learning from the data, using it as a departure point. And if you have relationships with the community, building on those to create the pieces that you will have in the end. It's the first time within African Caribbean, within the ACMS, that we will do something like this, where we will focus on the creatives and allow them to have a separate voice. it takes many parts. So there will be a physical exhibition. I think okay, this is more or less just talking about the importance of non-textual data in describing complex environments that are the cities that we live in and the neighborhoods that we're representing. It's called the Atlas, as I mentioned initially, because it's a collection of ideas. It's a collection of different artistic forms. It will also have, there's a written aspect, there's also a sonic aspect, and we'll bundle and stitch these different aspects together to make something that may be quite chaotic, but may be very representative of the environments that we're representing in the data. And it's all around recentering African mobility and understanding it in our own words. So I've just given a couple of examples from the Venice Biennale, which is focused on African futures and on African urbanism. Obviously, these budgets are huge, and these artists have worked on these projects for years, but examples of artistic interpretations of data. So this was the British Pavilion, but diasporan voices. So this is the creative output. So we're asking artists to come up with proposals for new commissioned works. An artist must be living in Nairobi, in this instance, Accra, or in Johannesburg. The main project exhibition will be in the first quarter of 2025 in Johannesburg, and there will also be a local exhibition in the last quarter of 2024 or the first quarter of 2025. It's to be confirmed. There'll be a printed atlas. It may not look like atlases that we know. It may look to kind of play on an atlas concept, but there'll also be an interactive website. So the website will represent the works, the visual works. The printed atlas will represent the works, and then there'll be 2 exhibitions that the works would be shown in. It's a commissioned work, but it's slightly complex. So you will be paid a commission fee to create the work in accordance with your proposal. And it will effectively be loaned to the project until the final exhibition, after which you will own your own work and are free to do with it as you wish. This is just more representations from the Venice Biennale. The Urban AC piece is a digitally printed ceramic piece, which is quite interesting, and it's to represent some of the interactions in Chicago. And Serge Clotet looks at the idea of reusing and how it intersects with society. So for the eligibility of the call, you must be Nairobi based. We're not specific on how long you must have lived here, but you must live here today. Applicants must be over 18 years old for legal reasons, and you must specialize in visual arts. So in photography, drawing, painting, sculpture, printmaking, digital art, mixed media, textile art, and ceramics. And you must be able to create a new commission piece in response to the themes within the timescale provided. This is just more representation. Actually, ACMS worked with Awood Sega to try and use some of the data from the 2021 surveys to create pieces. So these land maps are from Johannesburg on the left-hand side. So the application form, it's a fairly simple and straightforward application. We're inviting established artists, but we're also inviting early career artists. You can apply as an individual or as a collective, but the amount will be the same. So if you apply as a collective, the amount that you receive will be the same as an individual. It will ask for an artist statement, which will ask about your artistic philosophy, how many years you've been practicing, the mediums that you prefer to use. It will then ask for your proposed idea. The proposed idea will be a written statement of between 500 to 1,000 words. But it will then also invite media. So that could be a sketch, it could be a video, it could actually be a voice note if you felt like it couldn't be articulated in the previous section. And then it will ask for what the project means to you, and how you can see it living on within the city after the project has been completed. And then it will ask for evidence of previous work. And hopefully that would be a portfolio as a PDF. But if you don't have experience with portfolios, you can also attach a couple of pieces of your work, up to 5 pieces. And then a statement of intent that it's your own work and it's going to be original. And that you're understanding that the piece would be effectively in quarantine until 2025, after which time that you would have it back and to do with it as you please. So yeah, this is again from the Venice Biennale, just because it's very recent, but they use conviviality and an undefined and a couple of terms that also refer back to this data, and they presented it in textile art and print. Again, it's a much bigger budget. They had a much longer time, but just to give a couple of ideas about how some of these ideas can be articulated in art forms. So what are we looking for? So originality and creativity is obviously top. Artistic voice and expression is secondary. Technical skill and execution, although we will make allowances if you're new, and there's a section that you will state how many years that you've been practicing, and that will be taken into consideration. There'll be 8 in total awards per city, so we want to try and get some variety within those 8 awards. Innovative use of materials or techniques, also relating back to the theme if possible. So to think about potentially what materials are used within those spaces or colors, or and trying to always relate it back. And engagement with the key theme is definitely one of the main criteria we'll be looking at. It doesn't necessarily have to be aesthetically pretty, but we'll be looking at how it really integrates with some of the gritty and uncomfortable themes that may come out in the research data. So the benefits for you, why would you want to get involved? Well, I think it's a fantastic project and a great opportunity, but you'd be provided with 2,500 USD for your commission, and that would be paid in 2 installments. The first is effectively to cover materials, and the final payment would be your payment for your work. You maintain ownership overall, so it would just be on loan, and obviously it would be represented in a physical and digital form by the website, which is the online and physical atlas. There's the Johannesburg and Nairobi exhibition, and then the idea is that each of the 8 artists in each city work together on a digital platform where they can just exchange ideas. We hope for it to be quite fluid. There'll be a couple of organized Zoom calls, but we want to create an artistic community across cities that's passionate about cities. So that's hopefully would lead to later collaborations, or at least contacts in other spaces. So this on the right-hand side is Old Fadama in Ghana, just to give you a bit of an idea of some of the other cities and the spaces that we're working in. And this is Deep Sleuth in Johannesburg on the left-hand side. So this is the project timeline. So as I mentioned, today is an information dissemination event, but it's not opening today, but it will give you a bit of a head start to maybe start to think about some of the themes and prepare some of the documents. And the call will officially open on the 1st of December, and then you will be given the information dump. The call will close on the 22nd of December. So as I mentioned, it is a short time. It's 3 weeks. And then you'll receive assessment panel feedback in early January. You will then be given roughly 3 months to complete the work, and there'll be an interim reporting. Just on the next slide. So yeah, the creation will begin around the week of the 19th or slightly after. The online forum will happen around the 26th. The interim reporting will happen early March, and then you'll be expected to have completed the work by the end of April. Because of the way the payment structure is managed, it's really important that you finish by that deadline, because that's 75% of the payment. So we're working against quite a tight timeline. So it's really important that actually, if you know that you don't have the capacity to do the piece in this timeline, that you maybe wait for another opportunity, because it is a very, very strict project timeline. So yeah, as I mentioned, the payment would happen in two parts. 25% would be given for materials upon signing the artist agreement, 75% upon completion. You maintain ownership over your works, but you agree for it to be exhibited and on the website. And you must follow your submitted project proposal unless you have a discussion with the project team. So you couldn't submit something and then actually decide I want to do something completely different. Of course, there's artistic license and things change and mold. We understand that, but it needs to be roughly the same path as the submission that you sent in. And the next thing is, after the April deadline, you will be responsible for maintaining your work until the exhibitions. So it will stay with you, and then you will be asked to produce it at the Nairobi exhibition, and then we will organize for it to be shipped for the Johannesburg exhibition. And then works can't be shown publicly prior to anything public within the team. So that's kind of the overview of the call so far. I will take a minute to take any questions if anyone has anything, or if anything wasn't clear.
Excuse me. There's before we take questions from the audience here, there was a very, very early question from the online audience, if I can read that to you. So from Mildred at church, question: can the art be created with the help of AI tools?
Ideally not, no.
Good short answer. Okay, thank you. So for the online audience, please feel free to add more questions onto the chat. Otherwise, for the audience that's here, we can start with yourself. Please introduce yourself and
Jamie Ponte. So I'm part of the House of Friends, which is the launching of the Accra Art District. So, the question I have is the mapping that you have. How strict is it that we're using that mapping, or what's the wavelength?
So it can be an exceptionally abstract piece if you can connect it back to the themes. It's about in your philosophy behind your work. So the maps that you see are to inspire you, or to give you ideas, or you to understand those communities. But I wouldn't want 8 pieces that are surrounding mapping. That's not what this is about. It might be that you choose to look at informality within Rungai, and that is the focal point of your piece, and you don't touch on the mapping, or you touch on multi-local, but you don't necessarily touch specifically on the mapping. Exactly. So we have kept it city specific to then allow the assessment, because the go down will be part of the assessment panel, to be able to do the best job. But it's hoped at a greater scale that those pieces will speak to each other. The 4 themes that I picked out are across all the cities. There is nuances, and I'll speak to Mary about some of those. She's been doing the research, but generally it will be each city will focus on your own spaces. It also gives you the opportunity, if you so wish, to be able to go to those communities, if you're familiar with them, or if you think it would support your work. I would strongly encourage that you do. But yeah.
Any other questions?
I think just one of the slides you shows, I think, my name is Peterson Kamwabi. I'm an artist who was studio here. Yeah. One of the panelists in the next part of the session. But I was looking at the slides. I think there's one slide which was looking at the envisioned future, right? And I think you had, kind of 10 years and of course the future. And I kept wondering what the difference is with that period of time.
The difference in the periods for the imagined futures. So we found that when it's depending on how far away it is, you get more vivid representations of what those futures look like. If it's immediate futures, it might be that they're going to move to another area within Nairobi. And then, 5 years later, it might be that they're going to Johannesburg. And then beyond that, it might be outside of Africa. It very much depends. But from futuring workshops that I've been involved in, when the environment is closer to home and the timescale is less, you get much more vivid pictures. Let's put it that way. But this was looking at, but beyond that, where do you hope to be in the future? Where would you hope to have your children? Was a good question, because often people would be like, I love where I live and I don't want to leave. And then you say, where would you like your children to grow up? And they say, not here. And then from there, you start to unpack why that is. And often there's bits in their analysis that they weren't going to share, and where they hope to retire. So you might want to live here today, but in 30 years, you might not want to live in the same community. And then unpicking that information to look at the bigger and broader messages that come out of it. So the age bracket of respondents were 18 upwards. I know for the panel discussions that we're about to go into, we are focusing on young people within the communities, but the surveys were across the communities, from 18 to 80. And while the survey data is anonymized, we can provide the data to you to look through and look at some of the responses.
Hi, my name is Maggie Otieno. I'm a sculptor. I wanted to find out for example, for sculptors, I'm curious about the display of their work. Is the work going to be displayed indoors or outdoors? Because I'm imagining that if I have a concept, an outdoor concept, and my work would look better in that environment, or it's restricted to indoor display?
So within the application form, there's a technical installation section. So if you think, your work would need to be shown outside, we don't have restrictions for now. The majority of the exhibition will be inside, but there may be scope in the outdoor areas to be able to do outdoor installations.
Maybe a question about the data specifically. You already mentioned that we're not tied specifically to the exact data, but to be inspired by the overall themes. But I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit more about the data that you have, if it was looking at those 3 particular topics. And you mentioned that we would be able to get access to that data, but would that be before the submission of our proposals, or would that be following the submission of our proposals?
Of course. So you'll get the data at the same point that the open call opens. So effectively, it'll be the application form, and then there'll be a downloadable PDF and a link to accessing the data. So 2021, actually the project started in 2019, but because of COVID, obviously there was some adjustments to the timeline. So 2021, there was a huge survey that went out across the 3 cities. That was the 519 respondents from Nairobi. And they were given a set survey, which I think will be open to sharing with everyone, asking about their experiences within their communities. On the basis of that data is what we've created with these data visual maps that you'll see. We're also now going into a series of discussions and focus groups. Mary, that's sitting in front of me, is heading up that research. That should be complete by the beginning of December. And so that's more of a deep dive using some of the data that was pulled from the surveys, in addition to primary interviews, that should provide that secondary deep dive. So those are the key themes that you saw up on the board or from the survey data, and the focus groups that will happen within city will provide the next layer. We don't have those yet, so it's a bit to be confirmed.
And being from Nairobi, I also recognize the vast Somali community, but recognize that it's not represented in the data, which is something I found interesting.
I might let Mary reply to that question, but it may be, I'm assuming the areas that were selected, there was 3 areas in Nairobi selected for surveys, but I'm also surprised to see that Somali is not represented in the data at all.
Yeah, but maybe.
So just for Karina's benefit, the Somali community exists in Kenya and in the Republic of Somalia, and of course in Somaliland. So they are Kenyan Somalis, the way you'd have Kenyan Asians, who would then not be coming from Somalia. They are born, they are natives. And I know probably there was the element of the international migrants in these other studies. And so you would find the ones who will now say, I came from Somalia to come here. But you'll find like from the preliminary discussions we've had at like Kawangware, there's a community of Somalis in Kawangware, but they are Kenyan Somalis. So the way we will map that data will certainly be different from this one. Because now the dynamics we'll be discussing, the qualitative will be the quality of life and experiences within Kawangware for say Somalis, they are Burundians and all those people. Yeah, but I appreciate the observation.
Hi, my name is Saba. I'm a painter and a sculptor. I'm wondering, when you mention like Kawangware as a specific place, let's say I'm thinking about Kibera and Karen, which are 2 very different places. One is very bougie, and then the other is maybe like a slum. Would you penalize one for trying to bridge the gap, let's say saying a house help who lives in Kibera but works in Karen, and that's like her immigration? How would I be okay connecting 2 very different regions that are close to each other but are still within the city?
So they would need to be at least one of the regions that, or one of the spaces that we're working in. So Kibera is not included. But if it was, for example, looking at Rongai and somewhere else, and you were doing it as an example of like the spatial differences, it's possible. But it should be centered around the key themes and the communities that we've selected. And I'll let Mary go into that in a little more detail. We got any more questions? Otherwise, I think it could be a good time to switch to the panel discussion.
Yes, and as we are switching, there is a sign-in sheet that's going around. So for those who are here and haven't yet signed in, there's a form that's going around. Please make sure that you sign in. Otherwise, shall I leave it to you, Karina, to invite your panelists? Thank you. And there'll be space for questions after your discussion, right? Yes.
I think there's a holding slide somewhere in the many slides, sorry. I'll first invite Mary Mionga, who I've worked with through ACMS and through the Mellon Foundation. She's Dr. Mary, and she is heading up our research in Nairobi, and we'll be able to talk a little about the focus groups that we've done to date and some of the key themes that have come out of that. And she's about to go into a series of sessions with the community, and so will inform us over time and will be part of that data pack that you receive in early December. So welcome, Mary. And can I also invite Peter Kamwathi to the stage to speak? So Peter and Lauren Landau, who's the head of this project, met just out there a couple of months ago. And Peter opened by talking about conviviality and mobility between spaces, which is almost identical to a paper that Lauren Landau has written. And from there, it seemed an automatic connection for him to speak about how he actualizes some of the themes that we've discussed today in his work, to give examples of how you might think to do it in your own. So yeah, thank you both. I will start, Mary, if that's okay. Oh yeah.
Peter Kamadi is my cousin. So
Okay.
Peterson Kamwadi.
Okay, so I apologize. I'll invite Mary first to speak a little bit about the data, about the areas that we're working in and what's planned going forward, and maybe some of the sort of key themes or the interesting aspects of the data of the primary data so far.
Good afternoon. I'm very excited to meet you. I was telling Karina, I've never been amongst creatives. So I was waiting for eccentric stuff. So I was very happy to meet Joy Mboya, and it's nice to be here and to meet you guys. I'm from the academia. So you guys think we are abstract? We think you're abstract. So let's see how this works out. So I'm specializing in migration, and so that's partly why I'm part of this project. And as Karina says, this is a second phase of the primary data that was collected earlier and was released in 2021. So there's a lot that came out of that, and the sites were already predetermined. So like I had somebody ask about Kibera. It's a very popular study location, actually overstudied. And so one of the things the WITS team decided is to look at other localities. Where do migrants come and other people on the move? Where do they move to when they move to, where do they live when they come to Kenya, Nairobi? And so the three locations of interest are Kawangware, also known as Ongwaro, and a few other names I learned. They say that captures most people moving from the western part of the country, or so we thought. There's Kayole on the other side, eastern side, very interesting location. People have their own imaginations of how it looks like. It's full of concrete. There are no mabatis there. And then there's Ongata Rongai, diaspora for the Kenyans. They say it's too far. So those are three locations, and within those locations, we are going to have focus group discussions with the same demographics you described, people from 18 and above, and those who fairly lived about, like maybe even 5, 6, 7 years in the locality, because we want to understand how their life has been there, their experiences within the places they reside in, how they interact with other people, and to some extent, how they participate in the public civic spaces in those localities. And so we are only lucky to have piloted the study in Kawangware, and a few interesting things came up. But for now, that's a nice but short brief of what we are looking at. So we have questions that want to build on to some of these data you've seen. We want to know where people came from. And we want to know eventually where they will aspire to move to in the short, long term. We want to know who are their social networks. So how did you come to know about the specific location you're living at? And so very many interesting issues come out of that. And you find the way people pull each other from villages, from educational backgrounds, and those social contacts end up being the linkages, connections to the current state of being. And then there are varied reasons why people move to Karangware versus Kayole and versus Ongata. You find a kind of different type of person on the move. And so those are the things we hope to unpack. I'll pause a bit. From these focus group discussions. And we also intend to have very deliberate conversations with some of the focus participants to get those personal stories that hopefully will help our creative team to pick up things. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. And sort of to lead on from that, Peter, you have experience in working with some of these key themes outside of this research because it's something that you're passionate about. Could you tell us a bit more about that and potentially what within this presentation kind of spoke to you or spoke to your works?
Thanks, Karim. First of all, let me acknowledge one of the slides you showed earlier was of this year's Sharjah Triennale, and Maggie Otieno is one of the artists who's a part of the Anthropocene Museum, which is a presentation by the Cave Bureau. Yeah, so when I saw that, I thought, yeah, so it's good to have rock stars in the room. So I'm a visual artist, so I mean, I over the years I've explored different mediums, but at the core my practice is drawing, and like it's something that I've kept going back to in as much as I've also explored other mediums within the spectrum of techniques that one would use to create a visual expression. Part of the reason why drawing, I think now maybe, and this is, I've been at it for quite a while, one of the things I've come to realize is there's a potency to the line. The idea that you have this very basic mark, and it's a mark that has been used to, in a way, make worlds, you know, both, you know, from what is script through to what you'd call maps, for example. And so one of the things in my work, I've been looking, the constant theme has been the idea of a group and what the anatomy of a group, for example, the symbolism that a group that will be embedded within the group as a form, but then also paying homage to the fact that a group exists almost like as an institution, you know, that within a group you have all these other dynamics of, you know, hierarchy, you know, that comes as a result of age, and I think also other aspects. And so what I've done over I think not the past 2 years, I'm currently looking at the map or the idea of maps. Not, I mean, an atlas is a collection of maps, so you know the map just as the object. But then this comes on the back of an awareness that a map constitutes one of the outcomes almost of collective knowledge. So maps, monuments, books, you know, it has to do with also the idea of script. So it's something that speaks to a group without necessarily one having the image or the representation of a group being there. One of the things I think in a conversation last week or the week before was the idea that our collective movements and dynamics are actually as a result of a certain form of restlessness, but then also it also is built on the back of a certain how do I put it, not equality, but a desire for a certain form of equalization. So I'll give you an example that I will never make a map for myself because I already know the journey. I'll never write a book for me. So there's almost this sense that the act of bringing this thing from my mind, my experiences, you know, and putting it out there is what enables other members of the community that I'm part of, but also those who will come in the future, continue that movement. So restlessness, yes, that also gives rise and also brings to the fore these things. Between 2014 to 2018, I was working on a body of work called Constellation and Sediments. And this was a particular focus on looking at the phenomena of the spectacle as reported in the news media of the migration from towards the European North, you know, from parts of Africa and the Middle East. And this also came on the back of I think the shock of kind of looking at some of the figures that were presented, you know, 100, you know, migrants, you know, kind of, you know, about capsizes that was, you know, kind of, there was an assumption that it probably had 100 people. And what I realized was that after a certain point, those figures stopped being shocking anymore, whereby 100, 200, there's actually one that just came out. I think I've seen it on social media. I was decided the day before, of a particular boat that was carrying 300 and something people. And this is this week, actually. But the idea that that also what was presented to me as a figure, as a form of data, because of certain repeated exposure, almost like desensitized me to the tragedy and the magnitude of this movement towards and so what I did is I developed a series of drawings where I was trying to create the optics of a group by taking the same form and repeating it. So I'd probably have an image of myself repeated 300 times. And the idea was that you look at it from the spectacle of repetition. And also the fact that I, as a person who made it, did the work of repeating this in 200 times. But then beyond that, there was nothing that spoke to who the individuals were. So it was literally, it was a memorial not a memorial, but it was kind of just trying to highlight that we had the spectacle of numbers and the spectacle of this tragedy without the substance, that I never took the substance with. And then currently, so now the body of work I'm looking at is looking at the place of the individual in the group. So in constellation and sediments, I was looking at the spectacle of the group. And it's also a situation where context whereby the individual had no presence. They didn't exist. But then in constellation and sediment, which is something I've been exploring from around 2019, still trying to figure out a lot of things. I'm looking at how the individual who's a member of it and giving kind of, that center stage to that individual. But then it's also an acknowledgement that even when we don't see the individual, they're not erased, they're not non-existent. That if you zoom in enough, you'll realize that the building block of any group will always be that individual. I've kind of gone around there, but I hope I found my way back. Thank you.
But you've touched on almost every one of our themes in describing your own work. I really like what you said about a map being for someone else, but not for yourself because you know your own journey. And I think that's the important part of this atlas, is that often African cities are spoken for, but not by the people that live within them. And so this is an opportunity for people to speak for themselves about their own journey and their own map and how they want other people to see these spaces. So yeah, that spoke to me. And if both of you, Mary, I know you say you're not a creative, but you are creative. You were sitting in the audience and you maybe hadn't done anything like this before. You're very used to working within your own realm, and it might not be some of the themes that are raised. How would you tackle this? Or perhaps, Mary, because you've been at some of those initial discussions, which bits stood out to you as areas of departure to do works in? So I can think of like a few key themes that came out of the last discussion group that could be works in themselves. So like what's really stood out so far?
Okay. One thing as I listened to Peterson, not Peter, the way he said when you zoom into the individual. So ideally, when we speak about people living in these settlements, be it Nairobi, we say we are Nairobians. No, that speaks to a homogeneous group. But you go and find, because we did our piloting in Kawangware, you go and find that Kawangware does not have only Kenyans. Kawangware is home to Sudanese, people from Burundi, people from Uganda, and those are stories we never hear or read about. And so you have to sit with them and listen to their story. How do they negotiate that sense of belonging in that space? So for example, we had questions asking about what are the rules of engagement here? So how do you move, like, yes, so you've been told by Mary, there's a house here. How do you get to that house? And beyond the person who tells you there's an open space here for you can come and move into this place, and people tend to live in plots, which are small conglomeration of units, maybe one room, single room or one bedroom. You have to meet these gatekeepers. And so we had a very interesting discussion about cartels that are there. So in most cases, you think you just discuss with the landlords, agree on the terms, and you move in. No. There are people who decide who should move to that space. We are shocked to learn that in some spaces, if you're a single mother, you are not allowed to move in there, because there are conceptions about single women and what they do, how they are perceived, and the threats they are real or imagined to the so-called family settings in those spaces. Freedoms are not guaranteed. You cannot play your music loud. You are told you can be thrown out because you played your music too loud, irrespective of if you pay. So there are ground rules to how people live and survive in those spaces. And these were the underlying theme of most of our discussions. If you want to get a free ride to town, there's a way you communicate with this group of people and you can get your free ride to town. So you kind of survive if you're connected to this. So there are these power structures that I was very excited to learn about that you never pick up in any academic book. So those stories were very interesting, and how family social life has changed. For those who come in as single women, they come to set up families there, families that are living in split forms. Some are living here, some are living in the village. And those I felt were, I don't know how you'd capture them, but these are the pictures of the reality on the ground, as we say in Kenya. So that was interesting, the issue of the cartels. If it's political, like people were being asked, do you participate in any governance issues? If the chief calls for a meeting, would you turn up? And you're told, there's a cartel that connects us to this chief. So you can't walk like to the chief to just present your problem. You have to talk through so-and-so who knows so-and-so who knows so-and-so. Then they connect you. So this, there are really thin, invisible lines of the structural relations there. Those also came out. But also the image of a young, independent, but also lazy, despairing young person was dismantled because people were doing multiple jobs. You don't have one source of income. People are doing 3, 4 different hustles, and they're able to support their parents rather than, the typical assumption is that you'll ask your parents to sort you and all that, but they're the ones supporting parents and remitting monies back home. So just some of the things that came up that I thought I could share with this team.
And Peterson, the same question to you, but also interesting. You talked about groupings and about looking at individuals within groups. And it's interesting because some of the data that's come out is that some people don't want to belong to that society. They don't want to belong because they want to move. They want to set down roots enough to be able to navigate and able to, get easily on the bus or to do day-to-day chores. But they don't, if they plan on leaving, they don't want to belong. And that's an interesting space to sit in because we're always on the understanding that migrants want to be in that space that they've gone to, and they should be grateful to be there. That's not always what we've got out of some of the research data.
I think, hierarchies within group setting, it's a form of self-organization. Or what else may need to? The bears I raise my voice. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's you have that aspect of self-organization. I look at, well, part of my, you look at groups. One of the things that I think I've taken away from that is that there's that. So what groups can also function as vessels, not vehicles. Vessels too, actually, because it's a contained space. So it means that when you look at it as a vehicle, it means that there's an aspect of duration and time embedded in that. That you have groups that, you'll only existing, for as long as, your needs are met, or you're also able to, feed back into the group space. One of the things I've been looking at is, and I keep one of the words I've stopped using that I used to use was the idea of the individual contortioning themselves within the group context. But then I'd hope that form of that posture, because when you talk about contortion, it has to do with almost like adopting a position that is not relaxed, that has a lot of tension to it, which also means it also has duration, like you can't sustain it forever. So it's the idea that our position, and of course the exceptions to this rule, because you have group populations where it's not a consensus, you have no, like a prison population, for example. The dynamics of what happens within, but there are restrictions. That means that, you have to serve your time, for example. But then I think, so the group being a vessel and a vehicle means that there's a potential for the individual who's a constituent member to get to a point whereby the group no longer serves them, or they are no longer able to have a symbiotic or relationship where there's a give and take with the group, and that is okay. And I think also age also does fit in. And you're talking about the idea of the young, the optics of what a young person would be versus the reality of how they contribute to their own societies and communities. One of the things I looked at in Constellation Sediments was the awareness that Constellation, looking at dreams, aspirations, and I think one of the things you're looking at the idea of envisioned futures, which plugs in beautifully with that. But then sedimentation having to do with what you call mambo kwa ground, the realities that compel people to come together, and then what is the objective of that? What are you hoping to overcome, to mitigate, or to transverse, So there's movement this time. There's function.
Peterson, it might come across quite basic question. This is obviously an area that you are incredibly interested in. How do you do your research?
I'm not a scholar.
You sound like one.
Neither am I an academician. So basically a lot of reading. Well, I do a lot of reading, but then part of it is lived. A lot of it has more to do with kind of digging into books, what's been written, listening to people, having conversation with people about their experiences. I did this series called the Q series, and I remember every time people would come into the studio, and there were these big drawings. People start talking about the experiences, queuing, and these are people from different parts of the world. And I realized it was this particular grouping. It was a sequence of human forms, one before, behind, that was actually shared across most societies. I don't think there's anyone who'd never, ever been in a queue. And I think at the very basic, there's a lot of reading, looking at what's been done about it. Part of it is also seeing what have other artists, what have people in other disciplines, how have they analyzed this? What have they put forth? What do I have access to? But then I have this basic rule in my work that I'm interested in themes that, yes, are part of my experience as someone who's born in Nairobi, who's lived in and around this city. And I don't live in Nairobi anymore. I'm out of the city. But then I want to find what their parallels are on the continent and globally, because I think the spectrum of human experience is not as broad as we think it is. I think, what people would experience in Accra might not be happening exactly at the same time, but then people will experience it. It's part of a future waiting to happen. or have experienced as part of a certain past. And I think one of the things you had in the call, in the poster that read was the idea of temporality, which has to do with past, present, future. So I am interested in how issues that I comment on really do touch on what our own collective and social rituals, experiences might be. So I can't say that all the issues I've addressed are lived. Some of them are much more, like, look at migration. I've never had to undertake dangerous journeys to travel, But then through the process of, research, reading, looking at podcasts, looking at books, trying to understand the history of natural and human migration, I kind of realized that I am not, I'm also scarred by the experience of others too, yeah.
I'm going to open up the floor to any questions that you might have for Mary or Peterson.
Hi, there was a question in the online chat. Let me just bring it up, from Wallace Juma, and actually from Sebawali, about the slides that you shared earlier. Will they be available? Can they be shared?
So the information call slides will be shared with the overview. The data slides will go in the data dump, and there'll be much more in-depth data in that collection. But the overview of kind of when the call will come out and the dates will be circulated, and I'll send that to you to send to everyone. And if you signed up via the Eventbrite, you'll be sent it via an email.
Yeah, so feel free. Any questions for Mary and for Peterson?
For Mary, basically, so this was done during COVID, right? The data was, right? So I was just curious, like, did you find that Rongai had obviously Rongai is mostly, not mostly, but a significant number of students, but the schools were closed. So I was curious on if that came up in the conversations in some of the people that were in that area. So Rongai has a tremendous amount of student population because of the universities there. So it was during COVID. So it seems like a lot of those kids it disrupted the people that were living there, I guess is what I'm asking. So I was curious, how much was it a large amount of student population in your data, or was it more kind of a little more outside Rongai, a little more rural Rongai?
Okay. For that previous study, I think they just sampled that range, because the first I'm involved with is the qualitative bit that you're going into. But one thing that came out from we now have the project team, and we've had discussions, and of course we have the research team from Rongai. One thing about Rongai is it's cosmopolitan. So it tends to have a better rating for security, accommodation, and in welcoming people from all spectrum of life. There is the refugee community and all that. So I don't think it came up any disruptiveness. But I do know, even from the piloting at Kawangware, I think when we met the team, everyone was shocked because they were thinking these kids must be school age. No, there's just a very high population of young people. And that seemed to be the kind of sample we met at Kawangware. But you see, because we want to understand the futures, the fears, and all these things. So that's why we are going to be very particular about just extending the age groups. So you don't necessarily have the early family stories only. There are people who have more years in these areas, and they'll have a different narrative. Then we see how they all play out. Ideally,
the data set should give you the age groups, but also the survey it started at the end of 2019. So it caught, you know, the pre-COVID, and then obviously there was COVID. So it will represent, I would have thought, some of the student population that were living there at the time. And then it took a gap, obviously, during COVID, and then what wasn't finished was picked up again in 2021 before it was released. Any other questions?
I wanted to ask about the migrant communities. Did you specify whether they were legal refugees or undocumented refugees? Is that captured or it's not?
Not really, especially for the qualitative. It's one of the things we had to debrief about because, in fact, one of our research assistants is from South Sudan. They lived long in Kenya, and they already told us there are people who will not want to be had. They don't want to be found, and it's because they still don't feel safe. They've run away and they still don't want to be found. So we do anticipate that because one of the things is we expect them to speak freely. We are going to be recording the conversation with their consent. So that already means this about the publicity of what they share, though anonymized. There are still those who will fear that maybe they'll be thrown out there and get unnecessary targeting. So it's something I think we are going to consider serious, especially for the community in Ongatarongai. We didn't get the same sense in the communities in Kawangware. For example, they were telling us the life there. So, I mean, like if you look at the small businesses, the specialization, you'll find the Ugandan community in Kawangware is known for beauty. So all salons, you want to do your hair, you'll be told go to the Ugandan hairdresser. Then there'll be the Congolese community, they have their speciality. The Somali, they have their speciality. And of course, you know also the localities have their characteristics. The part they say is Congo. I don't know what you associate Congo with. When I say Congo, apart from music, what do you think about? War. War. So they say whenever we have demonstrations, the hotspots where all the action is, that's Congo in Kawangware. So, you know, the people living in Congo will be a different kind of, you know, there are those who feel for family, children, let's stay in another part. Yeah, so I'm actually very excited looking to that phase of the work.
The survey data didn't ask if people were documented or undocumented, to invite people, but also to ensure that there's a very big division between us and for example, the police, because there's been certain instances where, you know, certain departments and universities or institutions have worked alongside law enforcement bodies. So we wanted to make it very clear that this is a welcome and safe space for anyone that considers themselves to be a migrant, whether domestic or international.
Hello, my name is Edwin, and I'm a programmer by profession. So my question is to Mary about the research data. Is it open that we can find it online, or will it be just closed to the applicants?
So the shareable data will be on a PDF and on an online link. So anyone in theory that has access to it can look at it. You won't be able to, I mean, it's anonymized. So you'll get the general themes, but you won't be able to pick out specific people, for example. And obviously the data set is fairly small. So you can't make huge generalizations, but you can use it as a departure point to do further work. Okay. If there's no more questions, I want. Oh.
So I'm Joy Mboya with the Go Down, and it's really it's part of what thinking about as we project the exhibition ahead, because I think as you mentioned, you know, there'll be local exhibitions, but also the idea of of these three cities, Accra, Johannesburg, and Nairobi. And I'm just wondering whether there is, whether this question is relevant or not, is the exhibition setting, the exhibition space. I know asked about indoor, outdoor, but that just based on the subjects who provide the data, I wonder whether the exhibition is something that is accessible to them and whether that will how we might choose exhibition sites and therefore what the implications are for the artists as well.
And I think that's central. I think there's a big thing around here about ensuring that we learn and interpret but are not extractive, and that those communities can also interact with themselves, because in theory, what you'll create has been built around the data that's come from their communities. And so, as you'll have seen, the Nairobi is to be confirmed, and I hope we'll work with the Go Down and other partners to be able to ensure that it's not in a space that feels exclusive. That's a place that's inclusive to those communities as well as artists and others. The whole kind of point of this is that the works should impact beyond the walls that they live in. And that's why we're doing non-textual data. That's why, you know, there's this part of the call is how many people read a policy brief on informal governance? Not that many. And if you do, it's usually with a very specific purpose. But many people can go and look at a picture or a painting and it will evoke a certain reaction and it will lead to a certain conversation. So yeah, I think that's central to what this project's about and what we hope to create.
Thank you. Peterson, you spoke briefly about your work cues. And I was thinking about how that's quite representative of sort of the uncertainty and the sort of liminality of being a migrant and being in Kenya, whatever that journey might look like moving forward. So I just wanted to ask you, while you were creating that work and kind of exploring this idea of people waiting in queues, sort of what were you thinking about? Like where around waiting specifically?
I'm
also just curious about the tones that you use in your work, because they are almost monochromatic. So what's the message there? What's your emphasis?
There's a lot more color in our work now, so so I don't think I remember why. I stopped painting because I thought painting was very easy. And then, yes, so I know, sorry, loud. Yeah, I'm just establishing the next part of this statement. But then, so of course, you know, doing a lot of drawing. So printmaking has a lot of color, then of course drawing. So drawing was literally taking a break from working with color. So I'd hit a plateau, and I'll connect it to Teka's question. And but then, as I stopped using color, I was studying color. Like I literally decided, let me look at the color theories, you know, and try and understand how color functions. Because I am very particular with any mark that's on the surface of my work has to be intentional. I'm not, I can't live with accidents. I have to rationalize things, especially when work is concerned. So at that point, I was working grayscale because I'd taken a step away from color, hit a plateau. I thought what I was doing was monotonous, even in the world of color. So drawing and black and white in particular allowed me to step back and realign myself. So there's more color in my work now, I think from around 2017, 2018, there's color came back into the work, but also very intentional. And I mean, every color is purpose, you know, so yes, so yeah, so I realized that painting is the most difficult of disciplines in there, because I think we have a lot of, we make a lot of assumptions, and there's a certain access. That's what we do. Some of us are able to do in school. And so we assume that we know, and a lot of people do. So it means that by the time any painter is able to kind of carve a space for themselves, it's on the back of a lot of work. And that's victory. I mean, that's something worth celebrating. So I have a lot of respect for painters. I can't paint with my life now. I'm trying, but I still can't. Part of it is I was telling someone, because I have friends who are amazing painters, I tend to judge my exploration in that space against their work. And of course, I'll never be able to, talking about the cues and the waiting. So the cues start from the Michuki rules. Also remember kind of trying Michuki municipal transport, and I don't know what that extension is, introduces a set of rules to regulate the Matatu sector. And of course, in that process, period of adjustment, a lot of people walked, a lot of people queued. And I think now you have queues, especially in central Nairobi, that came on the back of that. And so I used to be able to go down then, and I was in those queues. But then I realized that you had the body of a group. It's a system of trying to mitigate chaos and manage situations whereby you have limited points of access and passage that are limited. But yes, it also kind of, one of the things that I've got to learn, and this is a part of my research, is that also queues it's transition, it's movement, it's a space you stop, but then it's a place of pause to enable movement. It's almost like a contradiction. It's almost like killing so that you can live. But then I also realized that as I looked at the physicality of queues, I could actually, in a fairly accurate way, pinpoint the environments that bring these queues to be. And I think one of the saddest queues to this day was an image post the Haiti earthquake, which was an image of women queuing to get water from a bowser. And it was a queue where there was no there's no private space. So you had all these women, and there were no men, who were really squashed against each other. And with these steel buckets that were outside. I've never been able to express that in any work I've done, but that photograph to this day, because I realized it's a space that speaks to survival, but it's also a space that speaks to this hope. But for me as an outsider, it's also an embodiment of great tragedy, But then I also realized that this is a mechanism that enables that movement, So when access to a certain future, it can be the next minute or tomorrow. And also, of course, you go into elections, you go into, and you see that people are traveling. You look at people are displaced, and the accessories around it. There's someone who's moving, who's in a queue with all that they own in the world. There's someone who's in a queue with just a fraction of the world that they own. So, yeah.
And then there's that that's deep stuff. I'm saying, and then there's usually the abstract art that the rest of us think is art. I think I think there's I'm just excited, Karina. I don't know how I wanted to ask you a question. How can I know the work they do? Is that through joy, go down itself, or to just appreciate the kind of talent in the room? That was my question.
So I think we have there was an attendee list, am I right? So in that, we'll definitely be able to share it with you, Mary, but I hope that you'll also be part of the panel that when we assess the works, given that you've been involved in the research. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. But thank you so much, everybody, for giving us your Friday afternoon in rain and traffic and whatever else. Very much appreciate it. The date for the open call is the 1st of December. So please keep it in your diary. The Go Down will send the call out, or we'll give you an alert to where to go. We have all your details, hopefully, from the attendee list. And if there's any questions in the meantime, the end of this is my email address. So I can't say anything that's not public, but if it's very specific, then yeah, I'm happy to get back to you. It's karinacamby@gmail.com. I don't like university email addresses. So yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to your applications. And thank you again to the Go Down for hosting and being a fantastic partner.
Okay. While I share the screen and put Karina's email on the screen for everybody, I think Joy, it's yeah. So karibu sana Joy.
Thank you to thank you. You know, it's the protocol of thank yous, and it's interesting, Karina and Mary, that one of the sites is Kawangware, because in the last week we just spent some time with students from 3 continents in Kawangware, and it's interesting to always see what people select, because those areas are so layered, and to see what you're able to do within the time that that you have around a subject area. So that will be interesting. But I think it's to just sort of say that the project that Karina brings is of interest to us as an institution, because this whole question around how we connect social reality and the issues of everyday living with specialized forms of communication like art, how this is accessible to people, how people might participate in co-creation, how people consume them, how you make them or place them in a way that they can engage with them is important to us. And that's why we asked that last question around what is the site of the exhibition, because even visual language is learnt in time. It's one thing to look at a picture and the 2 of us could have a conversation because I'm aware of Peterson and his thinking and what underpins his work. And then it could be 2 people who just run into the things and are sort of saying, it's very black and white, isn't it? I wonder why he didn't use color. Did he run out of money? You know, so the levels of conversation that are possible around a visual image is also a question of discussion. And so this whole idea around trying to ease the consumption and absorption of data, research data, by translating it through the eyes of artists is also problematic, perhaps. But we are interested in those problematics because institutionally we try to see whether we can break the boundaries that the obstacles, the hurdles that might sit between that problematic and so-called everyday person. So thank you so much for bringing this, and very curious to see how the artists will respond to the call and what work will come out and how the exhibition will be received in the end. Thank you very much, Karina. And thank you very much, everyone, for responding to the call and for attending as well. Thank you.
And now there's some refreshments and soft drinks at the side if anyone wants.